Your mother is gone. Who is going to pay the bill? That screeching question from Bianca sliced through the ambient jazz and low murmur of the upscale bistro like a serrated knife. Every head in Le Miroir turned. The waiters froze mid-stride, trays of crystal glasses balanced precariously on their fingertips. It was meant to be a celebration of Bianca's 32nd birthday, a curated event with 15 of her closest, most photogenic friends. I had been sitting at the far end of the table, nursing a glass of tap water, feeling like a stain on a silk sheet. And just moments ago, I had stood up, clutched my worn leather handbag against my chest, and walked toward the ladies' room. Except, I didn't turn toward the ladies' room. I walked straight past the mahogany hostess stand, pushed through the heavy glass doors, and stepped out into the biting Seattle drizzle. A yellow taxi was idling at the curb, its for-hire light glowing like a beacon in the mist. I didn't look back at the chaos I had left behind. I didn't look back at the confusion, the shouting, or the unpaid check that totaled nearly $600. I didn't look back to see my son, Julian, frantically scanning the room while Bianca loudly proclaimed that I had ruined the aesthetic of her perfect evening. That walk from the table to the taxi was the longest 10 yards of my life, but as I slammed the car door shut and gave the driver my address, I felt the first true breath of air enter my lungs in 3 years. However, that departure was merely the opening act. The real storm hit at 2:15 inches the morning. When Julian threw open the front door of my craftsman bungalow, the scream that tore from his throat wasn't one of anger, but of sheer, unadulterated panic. He had expected to find me crying in my bedroom or perhaps hiding in the kitchen. Instead, he found me sitting in my favorite wingback chair in the living room. The lights were dim. Beside me sat 3 large suitcases, packed tight. On the coffee table, a single manila envelope rested with the weight of a gavel. I sat there, completely calm, hands folded in my lap. I knew they would come. I knew that after the humiliation of having to scramble for credit cards in front of their wealthy friends, after the embarrassment of being abandoned by the woman they treated as a walking wallet, they would come for blood. They would come to demand an explanation. They probably thought they could bully me into an apology, force me to fix the financial mess, and drag me back into the box they had built for me. But the woman sitting in that chair was no longer Evelyn Vance, the doormat. That night, at 62 years old, I had finally shed the skin of the convenient mother. I had become someone else entirely, someone who had found the terrifying, exhilarating courage to say, no more. To understand how a mother reaches the point where she walks out on her only child, you have to understand that this wasn't a snap decision. It wasn't a moment of temporary insanity, as Julian had shouted to the restaurant manager. It was the result of a slow, agonizing erosion. It was the result of thousands of small cuts, months of swallowed pride, and the dangerous lie I had told myself, that a mother's love requires the complete annihilation of her own dignity. It started subtly, about 2 years ago. Julian called me on a rainy Tuesday. He used that specific tone of voice, soft, slightly pathetic, the voice of the little boy who had scraped his knee. I knew that tone. I had been conditioned to respond to it for 32 years. Julian was a marketing executive now, married to Bianca, a woman whose career seemed to revolve around taking photos of expensive lattes. They drove leased luxury cars. They wore designer labels. "Mom," he had said, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm in a bind. It's embarrassing to even ask." My heart had hammered against my ribs. A mother always assumes the worst: cancer, a car accident, a layoff. "What is it, Jules? Are you hurt?" No, we're healthy. It's just, well, we had an unexpected issue with the plumbing in the condo, and Bianca's commission check is delayed. We're short on the mortgage this month. Could you spot us $600? Just until the 1st of the month. I promise. $600. My pension from 40 years as a school nurse was fixed. I lived comfortably, but frugally. I budgeted for every cup of coffee. But this was my son. My only boy. "Of course, Julian. I'll transfer it in the morning." "You're a lifesaver, Mom. Seriously, I'll pay you back in 2 weeks." He didn't pay me back in 2 weeks. He didn't pay me back at all. The next month, it was a critical repair for Bianca's vintage convertible, $400. Then came their anniversary dinner, where his card had glitched, and could I just Venmo him $200? Then came the exclusive gym membership they couldn't cancel without a fee. In 8 months, I had loaned them nearly $4,000. Every time I gently, timidly brought up the repayment, Julian's face would crumble into a mask of disappointment. Mom, I thought you helped us because you loved us. I didn't know this was a transaction. I didn't know you were keeping a ledger. Those words were weaponized guilt. They made me feel small, stingy, and cold. I felt like a miser hoarding pennies while my children struggled. So, I stopped asking. And they stopped pretending they would ever pay. The dynamic of our visits shifted, too. Gone were the Sunday afternoons where Julian would come over just to talk, to eat my pot roast, to ask about my garden. Now, he only appeared when there was a crisis that required a checkbook. Bianca rarely came at all, and when she did, she treated my home like a waiting room. She would sit on my sofa, scrolling through her phone, answering my attempts at conversation with monosyllabic grunts, refusing the food I had spent hours preparing because it wasn't gluten-conscious or organic enough. The breaking point began to form on a Friday evening 3 months ago. I was in my kitchen, making a simple vegetable stew, when I heard the front door unlock. Julian still had a key for emergencies. "Hey, Mom, we brought takeout, Thai food." Julian walked in, followed by Bianca, who was laden with shopping bags from the downtown boutiques. For a fleeting second, I felt a spark of joy. They had surprised me. They wanted to have dinner with me. "Oh, honey, that's so sweet. I have stew on the stove, but—" "Save the stew," Julian said, dropping his keys on the counter. "We're starving." They took over my kitchen. They unpacked the plastic containers, grabbed plates from my cabinets, and sat down. I joined them, smiling, desperate to connect. "How is the marketing campaign going, Julian?" "Fine. Stressful." He didn't look up from his pad thai. "Bianca, pass the sriracha." "Julian, did you bring the bottle of Pinot Noir we left here last time?" Bianca asked, looking around. "It's in the fridge, Mom. Can you grab it?" I stood up. I fetched the wine, a bottle that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I poured 2 glasses. They didn't offer me any. They ate rapidly, talking over my head about people I didn't know, influencers they despised, and parties they had attended. I sat there, dipping my spoon into my stew, feeling like a ghost haunting my own dining room. When the food was gone, Julian pushed his chair back and sighed. "Mom, we need to talk to you about something exciting." There it was, the pitch. "Bianca and I need a break. It's been a brutal year. We found this incredible wellness retreat in Sedona. It's perfect. Yoga, meditation, hiking. It's exactly what we need to recharge our marriage." "That sounds lovely," I said cautiously. "It is. The problem is, we have to book it by tonight to get the discount, and with the car payments this month." He trailed off. He didn't need to finish. The silence hung in the air, heavy and expectant. "How much, Julian?" $2,500. It covers everything for a week. $2,500. That was 3 months of my living expenses. That was my emergency fund for the roof repair I knew I would need next winter. "Julian, I don't have that kind of liquid cash right now." Bianca looked up from her phone. Her eyes were icy blue, sharp and assessing. "You don't have savings?" "I do, but it's for emergencies. For when I get sick, or if the house needs work." "What is more important than your son's mental health?" Bianca asked. Her voice was smooth, but there was a jagged edge beneath it. "Evelyn, Julian works himself to the bone. He deserves this. If my parents had the money, they would give it in a heartbeat. They understand that family supports family." The way she said my name, Evelyn. Not Mom, not Mrs. Vance, just Evelyn. It was a power play. "I'll check my account," I whispered. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." Julian's smile returned, radiant and hollow. They left 20 minutes later, taking the rest of the wine and leaving the dirty takeout containers on my table. I sat there in the silence, smelling the lingering scent of spicy peanut sauce and expensive perfume, and I cried. Not because of the money, but because of the crushing realization that I was nothing more than a resource. I was an ATM with a heartbeat. I transferred the money. They went to Sedona. During that week, Julian sent 2 text messages. One was a photo of a Red Rock Canyon with the caption, "Vibes." The second was a text on the last day, heading home, exhausted but happy. They didn't call. They didn't ask how I was. During that same week, I came down with a severe flu. I lay in bed for 3 days, feverish and shaking, unable to drive to the pharmacy. My neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, had to bring me soup and aspirin. "Where is that son of yours?" Mrs. Higgins had asked, arranging the pillows behind my back. "He's on a wellness retreat. He needed to recharge." Mrs. Higgins had looked at me with a pity so profound it felt like a physical blow. She didn't say a word, but her eyes screamed the truth I was trying to ignore. When they returned, the requests didn't stop. They accelerated. A new sofa, because the old one didn't match the feng shui. A deposit for a larger, sleeker apartment in a trendy district because the old one was stifling their creativity. "Mom," Julian told me, one Sunday morning, standing in my kitchen while drinking the coffee I had ground by hand. "Think of it as an investment. We need a guest room so you can come stay with us comfortably when you get older. We're doing this for us, for the family. For the family." That phrase was the lock on my wallet, and guilt was the key. I gave them another $1,500 for the deposit, but the invitation to stay never came. When I helped them move, spending 12 hours cleaning their old apartment so they would get their security deposit back, Julian didn't even offer me a ride home. "We're just so beat, Mom," he said, standing in the empty hallway of the old apartment. "Can you grab an Uber? We'll Venmo you for it." They never Venmo'd me. I took 2 buses home in the rain, my knees aching from scrubbing baseboards, my heart aching from something far worse. The climax arrived with Bianca's birthday. Le miroir, 8 p.m. "Dress code is chic," the text from Bianca read. Not a question, a summons. "And Evelyn," a follow-up text chimed. "Since there are so many people coming, Julian and I were hoping you could pick up the wine tab? Or maybe cover the appetizers. It would really help us out since we're hosting." I looked at my bank balance. It was bleeding red. I had dipped into the principal of my small retirement fund, but I went. I put on my best dress, a navy blue sheath I had owned for 10 years. I wore my mother's pearls. I wanted to look dignified. The dinner was a display of excess that made my stomach turn. Platters of oysters, towers of seafood, bottles of imported champagne that cost more than my monthly utility bill. Julian was laughing, loud and boisterous, playing the part of the successful executive. Bianca was holding court, snapping photos, accepting gifts wrapped in silver paper. I sat at the end of the table, squeezed between a friend of Bianca's who designed handbags and a man who spent the entire night talking about cryptocurrency. No one spoke to me. Julian didn't introduce me. I was a ghost again. When the bill came, the waiter placed it in the center of the table on a small silver tray. It sat there like a landmine. Julian picked it up. I saw his eyes widen. He leaned over to Bianca, whispering urgently. She frowned, then looked down the table. Her eyes locked onto me. "Evelyn," Bianca called out. The table went quiet. "Come here a sec." I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked to the head of the table. "Look," Julian said, his voice low, trying to maintain his composure. "The bill is a little higher than we anticipated. It's $1,200. We can cover half. Can you get the rest? As your gift to Bianca?" $600. I looked at my son. He was sweating. He looked terrified of losing face in front of his friends. Then I looked at Bianca. She wasn't scared. She was annoyed. She looked at me with pure entitlement, waiting for me to clean up their mess. "I don't have $600, Julian," I said softly. "Mom, don't start," he hissed. "Do you have your credit card? Just use the Visa. We'll figure it out later." We'll figure it out later. The mantra of the addict. The lie of the user. Bianca's birthday comes once a year. Bianca said, her voice rising, ensuring the nearby tables could hear. Are you seriously going to embarrass us over money? After everything we do for you? What do you do for me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. We let you be part of our lives, Bianca snapped. We include you. Most people put their mothers in homes and forget them. We invite you to dinner at Les Miroirs. The cruelty of it took my breath away. The guests were staring. The waiter was shifting uncomfortably. Mom, please, Julian begged, his eyes darting around the room. Just pay it. You're making a scene. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a silent, decisive severance. The cord that had tethered me to them, the cord woven from love and guilt and duty, finally frayed and broke. I'm going to the restroom, I said. Good, Julian exhaled. Hurry back. I walked away. I walked past the restrooms. I walked out the door. Now, sitting in my living room at 2 a.m., watching Julian hyperventilate at the sight of my suitcases, I felt a strange, cold peace. What is this? Julian stammered, pointing at the luggage. Mom, why are your bags packed? Where do you think you're going? I'm leaving, Julian. Leaving? Leaving for where? A vacation? No, I'm moving. Bianca stepped forward, her mascara smudged, her perfect facade cracking. Moving? You can't move. You live here. This is your house. I reached for the manila envelope on the table and slid it toward them. Read it. Julian snatched the papers. His eyes scanned the legal jargon. His face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. You sold the house? I sold it 3 weeks ago to a cash buyer. The closing was finalized yesterday. The new owners take possession on the 1st of the month. You have 5 days to remove any boxes you still have stored in the garage. You sold the house? Bianca shrieked. But this house, this is our inheritance. This is the family asset. How could you sell it without consulting us? It was my house, Bianca. My name was on the deed. My husband and I paid for it. I didn't need your permission. But where is the money? Julian demanded, his voice rising to a shout. Houses in this neighborhood go for $600,000. Where is the check? I paid off my small debts, I said calmly. I set aside enough for my relocation. And the rest, about $400,000, I donated. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated, sucking the oxygen out of the room. You donated it? Julian whispered. To who? To a shelter for victims of financial and emotional abuse, I said, looking him dead in the eye, because I realized that's what I was. I was a victim, and the abusers were the 2 people who were supposed to love me most. That is insane, Bianca yelled. We aren't abusers. We're family. We borrowed money. That's what families do. I stood up. Family respects each other. Family doesn't treat their mother like a servant. Family doesn't invite her to dinner just to make her pay the bill. Family doesn't make her feel invisible. I'm your son. Julian stepped toward me, his hands clenched. You owe me. You raised me to rely on you. I raised you to be a man, Julian. Somewhere along the way, you decided it was easier to be a parasite. I enabled it. I take responsibility for that. I taught you that you could treat me this way. But tonight, the lesson is over. You can't do this, he pleaded, desperation creeping back into his voice. We're broke, Mom. We maxed out the cards to pay for the dinner tonight. We're behind on the new apartment. If you leave, if you don't help us, we'll lose everything. Then you will lose everything, I said. And maybe in the wreckage, you'll find your own spine. I picked up my purse. My taxi to the airport will be here in 10 minutes. The keys are on the counter. Do not look for me. Do not call me. I have changed my number. You're going to die alone. Bianca spat, venomous and shaking. You're going to rot in some nursing home with no one to visit you. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her not as a monster, but as a sad, shallow child. I would rather be alone and at peace, Bianca, than surrounded by people who only love me for what I can buy them. The taxi honked outside. I walked past my son, who was slumped on the sofa, head in his hands. I walked out the door into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I flew to Oregon that morning. My sister, Martha, was waiting for me at the small regional airport near Harbor Cove. I hadn't seen Martha in 5 years because Julian had always needed me during the holidays, and I couldn't afford the flight. When I saw Martha's face wrinkled, kind, and framed by wild gray hair, I dropped my bags and collapsed into her arms. I cried for an hour. I cried for the loss of my house, for the loss of the son I thought I had, for the wasted years. Martha took me to her small cottage overlooking the churning gray Pacific. She gave me the guest room with the yellow quilt. She made me tea. She didn't ask questions until I was ready to talk. Recovery was like detoxing from a drug. The first few weeks, my phantom phone syndrome was terrible. I kept expecting it to ring. I kept waking up in a panic, thinking Julian needed rent money or Bianca needed a dress. The silence was terrifying. But slowly, the salt air began to heal me. I started walking on the beach every morning, collecting sea glass. I found a job at a local used bookstore called the Dusty Page. The owner, a sharp-witted woman named Sarah, didn't care about my resume. She liked that I knew the difference between Bronte and Austen. I made friends, real friends, women my age who hiked on Saturdays and drank cheap wine on Tuesdays and actually listened when I spoke. I realized that for years I had been starving for connection, trying to subsist on the crumbs Julian threw me. Now, I was at a banquet. I didn't hear from Julian for 6 months. I had blocked his number, his email, and his social media. Martha acted as a gatekeeper, filtering out the noise. She told me he had tried to reach out, desperate and angry, then pleading, then angry again. He's losing the apartment, Martha told me one evening while we shelled peas on the porch. He had to sell the luxury car. Good, I said, sipping my iced tea. And I meant it. Then, a year later, the doorbell of Martha's cottage rang. It was a sunny afternoon in July. I was in the garden, weeding the hydrangeas. I wiped the dirt from my hands and walked around the side of the house. Julian stood there. He looked different. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He had lost weight. His hair was graying at the temples. He looked tired, worn down, and strikingly human. Beside him stood a woman holding a baby carrier. It wasn't Bianca. It was a woman I didn't know, soft-faced, wearing a simple sundress. "Mom," Julian said, his voice cracked. I froze. My instinct, that old, dangerous mothering instinct, was to run to him, to fix him. I planted my feet firmly in the grass. "Hello, Julian." He swallowed hard. Can we come in? Just for a minute?" I looked at Martha, who was standing on the porch with her arms crossed. She gave me a small nod. It was my choice. "You can come to the porch," I said. "Who is this?" "This is Claire," Julian said. "And this is Mia." He pointed to the baby carrier. Inside, sleeping soundly, was an infant with a tuft of black hair. "Bianca left me," Julian said quietly as we sat on the porch steps. "About 2 months after you left. When the money ran out, so did she. We lost the apartment. I had to declare bankruptcy." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't devastated either. It was a consequence." "It was the best thing that happened to me," he admitted, looking at his hands. "I hit rock bottom, Mom. I slept in my car for 3 weeks. I lost my job. I had to work in a warehouse. I had to actually work." He looked up at me. His eyes were clear, free of the arrogance that had clouded them for a decade. "I met Claire at the warehouse. She didn't know who I was or who I pretended to be. She just liked me. We have a small place in Portland now. It's tiny. We struggle. But it's real." He gestured to the baby. Mia was born 3 months ago, and when I held her, when I looked at her, tears began to stream down his face. "I realized what I had done to you. I realized that you loved me the way I love her, and I treated you like garbage." I looked at the baby. "My granddaughter." "I didn't come for money," Julian said quickly, seeing my hesitation. "I swear, I don't want a dime. I I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I wanted you to know that you saved me. If you hadn't left that night, if you hadn't cut me off, I would still be that monster. I would still be drowning." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I know I can never repay the financial debt, but I started a payment plan. It's only $50 right now, but I'll send it every month, I promise." He placed the envelope on the porch railing. I looked at my son. I saw the lines of worry on his face, the rough calluses on his hands from manual labor. He was no longer the entitled boy I had enabled. He was a man who was building himself from scratch. I stood up and walked over to the baby carrier. Mia stirred, opening eyes that were the exact shade of Julian's. "Can I hold her?" I asked. "Of course," Claire said, smiling gently. I picked up the baby. She was warm and heavy and smelled of milk and hope. "I accept your apology, Julian," I said, rocking the baby. "But things are different now." "I know," he said humbly. "I am not your bank. I am not your safety net. I am your mother, and I am Mia's grandmother. If you want a relationship, it will be based on respect. If you ever try to use me again, the door closes forever." "I understand," he said. "I want you in her life. I want her to know the woman who had the strength to walk away." That evening, we had dinner together. Simple grilled chicken and salad. Julian helped Martha with the dishes. He didn't check his phone once. He didn't complain about the wine. He laughed, a real laugh, not the performative one he used to do for his rich friends. When they left to drive back to Portland, I stood on the porch and waved until their taillights disappeared around the bend. I went back inside. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. I picked up the envelope Julian had left. $50. It was a drop in the ocean compared to what he had taken, but it was the most valuable money I had ever held. It was the currency of respect. I walked into my bedroom and opened the window to let in the sound of the ocean. I thought about that night at Le Miroir. I thought about the terror of walking out that door, the fear of the unknown, the crushing guilt of breaking the mold of the good mother. It had been the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I lay down in my bed, listening to the rhythm of the waves, I knew the truth. We are taught that love means holding on, no matter how much it hurts. We are taught that a mother's love must be sacrificial, endless, and without boundaries. But that is a lie. Sometimes, the most profound act of love is not holding on, but letting go. Sometimes, you have to break the heart you love to save the soul within it. I saved myself that night, and in doing so, I saved my son too. I closed my eyes, breathed in the salt air, and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who finally knows her own worth.